Malaysia was the first Muslim country to pass legislation recognizing domestic violence as a crime. Zaina Anwar was part of a coalition of women's organizations that worked together to help implement this Domestic Violence Act.
There wasn't a law that makes domestic violence a crime. So, for the women to get the men to stop beating them was a major obstacle, because many of these women don't want a divorce. They just want their husbands to stop beating them. The level of awareness began with the setting up of a domestic violence shelter, the first domestic violence shelter in Malaysia in 1982, Women's Aid Organization. The campaign actually began in 1985, and we decided that what we wanted to do was to campaign for a Domestic Violence Act, to make domestic violence a crime in Malaysia. We formed what we called a joint action group, on violence against women. And that brought together different groups. It brought together Women's Aid Organization. This is a group that runs a shelter for battered women, the first shelter for battered women. It brought together the women's wing of the Malaysian Trade Union Congress. Eventually, it expanded to include other women's groups, including my group, Sisters in Islam, which came in later to look at the Islamic perspective of the issue, the whole issue of domestic violence. So the group was very fluid. People came in, people left. Another major group, one of the original founding members of the group, is the Association of Women Lawyers. So, the lawyers' role were very important because, when we decided that we wanted an act to make domestic violence a crime, then the lawyers within the coalition then drafted a model statute, a model domestic violence law, which became the basis for our negotiation with the government. We were all committed to a common vision that no woman deserves to be beaten. Even though we came from different backgrounds and each of our organization had different priorities and not necessarily domestic violence, we were all working because of that shared vision and because we were all women, to show the authorities that this demand for a Domestic Violence Act did not come from one isolated group or from one small voice, that there is a huge, a big coalition of different groups, of women's groups, lawyers, trade union people, academics, to show the diversity of voices from different sectors of society that's demanding for such a legislation. I think it's very important that when you want to push for change, that you do have, to customize your message to different audiences. We had to build public awareness that this is wrong, that men don't have a right to beat their wives. And we organized lots of public campaigns in shopping complexes. We had women who were battered, who were willing to speak to the public, who were willing to speak to the press. So the press then had case studies in which they could use to make real, this is a real problem. Women don't enjoy being beaten, and the suffering that women go through, and the kind of impact that it had on them, their health, their well-being, and the impact on the children. So I think it was very important that we had this pool of women who could speak with the press to publicize the issue, to raise awareness on the issue. On Women's Day, every year on Women's Day, we organize events to draw attention to the issue of domestic violence. We organize walks, fun fairs, concerts, and all these events would have exhibitions, material on domestic violence, photographs on domestic violence, stories on domestic violence, and we worked very closely with the media as well for them to do feature stories on the issue of domestic violence. Then in the area of the government, we decided to take the initiative because we want a Domestic Violence Act we want it to be negotiated on our terms and based on our demands. So the Association of Women Lawyers then drafted a bill, a domestic violence bill, and that became the basis of our negotiation with the government. And the government was willing to negotiate with us, and the government then formed an interagency committee that includes us, the women's groups, that includes the religious department, the welfare department, the police, and all the different, the Attorney General's chambers, all the different agencies of government that would be involved in the implementation of such an act. And so our model draft law became the basis of the negotiation. We used the constitutional framework as well, because we wanted to make domestic violence a crime. Certain segments of the religious department said this is a family matter, it is not a criminal matter. So the fact that we made it a crime meant that it has to come under federal jurisdiction and not under family jurisdiction, which in Malaysia, for Muslims, family is Islam religion is a state matter. So if you want to make domestic violence under family law, it will come under the jurisdiction of each different state. So there's no assurance that if you turn it into a family matter, every state will make domestic violence a crime under the family law. So it was a very important strategy that we said this is a crime, it's under federal jurisdiction, and we only want one law, one Domestic Violence Act to apply to all Muslims and non-Muslims. When we started negotiation, another obstacle emerged when the representative of the religious department said that, no, you cannot have a Domestic Violence Act to apply to Muslims, because in Islam, a man has a right to beat his wife. So then it's like we had to re-strategize, how do we deal with this obstacle? And that was where my group, Sisters in Islam, came in. So one of the things that we did was we came up with a little booklet, a question and answer booklet, and the title is, Does a Muslim Man Have a Right to Beat His Wife? It's like very in your face, And we use verses in the Quran, we use the tradition of the Prophet, to show that Islam actually promotes a relationship of compassion, of justice, of equality between a man and a woman. And dealing with the mullahs and the objections of the religious department, locating your argument in a language that they can understand, that's very, very important as well. It was not until 1994, so that is 9 years of campaigning, negotiation with the government before we finally got the legislation passed by Parliament. And even after it was passed by Parliament, it was not gazetted, it was not implemented because of further objections. So it was like another 2 years of campaigning and lobbying, before the act was implemented. So only in 1996, so it took altogether really 11 long years of negotiating and campaigning and raising public awareness before we finally got the act implemented. Within the first few years of the implementation of the act, there was a huge jump in the numbers of reports to the police on cases of domestic violence. So after almost 10 years, we're pushing for various amendments to the act now. And again, we realized that it's not enough to just have a law. You have a law, but you don't change attitudes. The law has very little impact. The law allows for a woman to take an interim protection order to stop her husband from beating her. But for her to get the interim protection order, she had to make a report to the welfare department. And it's the welfare officer who will go to the court and get the interim protection order for the woman. And we found that again, because of attitude, that this is a family matter, the woman needs an interim protection order immediately, urgently, but the welfare officer is more concerned about preserving the family. So now we're pushing for an amendment in the Act where the woman individually can go direct to the court and apply for her own interim protection order. Being inclusive, being consultative, being unselfish about power is very, very important, because if you want to bring change, you cannot monopolize the issue and say, this is my issue and others don't have a right to talk about the issue. The diversity of voices, the diversity of groups, and the spread of the groups that's supporting the issue, that's very important. We really want to work, for a world where men and women are regarded as human beings of equal worth and equal dignity. Where there will not be violence, where it will be a peaceful, prosperous world, that's filled with justice for everyone.